All right, so today, let's deep dive into something that I think a lot of us can relate to, even if we don't always talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Relationship anxiety.
Yeah.
That kind of nagging feeling that something's off.
Right.
Even when things seem pretty good on the surface.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we're going to unpack what causes this,
Right, guy.
how it shows up, and most importantly, what you can do about it.
Love it.
And to help us navigate this tricky terrain,
Mm-hmm.
we've got some great insights from Verywell Mind Healthline.
Right.
Right.
The Calm blog.
It's like that old saying, the course of true love never did run smooth.
Oh, yeah.
But sometimes, even when the waters seem calm, there's this undercurrent of anxiety that can really pull you under.
Exactly.
Yeah,
And it's so common.
it is.
But it can be tough to figure out if it's just normal relationship jitters or something deeper.
Well, one thing that's important to remember is that relationship anxiety isn't always a sign that the relationship itself is bad.
It can actually be rooted in our own past experiences,
Right.
our personal baggage,
Yeah.
or even just our own insecurities.
Okay. That's actually a relief to hear.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people, myself included,
Right.
might automatically jump to the conclusion that if they're feeling anxious,
Yeah.
it means the relationship is doomed.
Right. And our sources really highlight this point.
Okay.
For example, past relationship trauma can create a sort of subconscious danger signal around intimacy. Even when you consciously want a healthy relationship.
Okay.
It's like your inner alarm bells are going off, even if there's no real threat present.
So it's like your past experiences are sort of coloring your perception of the present.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to understand where these anxieties are coming from.
Right.
So you can start to address them at the root.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So what are some other common causes that our sources point to?
Well, they talk about the role of attachment styles, which basically refers to the patterns of relating to others that we develop early in life.
Right.
If someone had a parent who was emotionally unavailable
Yeah.
or inconsistent with affection,
Uh-huh.
they might develop an anxious attachment style.
Okay.
And this can definitely show up in their adult romantic relationships,
Gotcha.
making them more prone to worry,
Yeah.
insecurity,
Mm-hmm.
and that constant need for reassurance.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So it's like our early childhood experiences can actually create a blueprint
That's wow.
for how we approach love and connection as adults.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, this is where things can get really tricky.
Okay.
Because if you're not aware of your attachment style,
Uh-huh.
you might be unconsciously replicating those same patterns in your current relationships.
Interesting.
It's like you're on autopilot, playing out the same old script without even realizing it.
That's fascinating and a little scary too, to be honest.
Yeah.
It makes you realize how much our past can influence our present,
Right.
even if we're not consciously aware of it.
Mm-hmm.
So what about low self-esteem?
Okay.
I know that comes up a lot in the context of relationship anxiety.
It's a huge factor.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah.
If you don't believe you're worthy of love,
Right.
it's easy to assume your partner doesn't truly love you either,
Yeah.
even if they're constantly showing you affection.
That's a vicious cycle, isn't it?
It really is.
Yeah.
You end up projecting your own self-doubt onto your partner and interpreting their actions through this lens of insecurity.
So it's not necessarily that your partner is doing anything wrong.
Right.
It's more about how you're perceiving their actions.
Exactly.
Okay.
And this can lead to all sorts of problems like constantly seeking reassurance,
Yeah.
overanalyzing every word and action, and even pushing your partner away as a way of testing their love.
Speaking of overanalyzing,
Yeah.
that's another classic sign of relationship anxiety, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it can be so exhausting.
I know.
You're constantly dissecting conversations, reading into text messages,
Yeah.
and trying to find hidden meanings where there are none.
Right.
It's like you're living in a perpetual state of detective work.
Oh my gosh.
But instead of solving crimes, you're just creating more anxiety for yourself.
I think we've all been there at some point, right?
Absolutely.
Agonizing over a text message for hours,
Right.
trying to decipher every emoji and punctuation mark.
Right.
Oh, it's the worst.
And it's important to remember that sometimes a text message is just a text message.
It's so easy to get caught up in that spiral of overthinking,
Yeah.
especially when you're already feeling anxious about the relationship. Our sources give a great example.
Okay.
Your partner says they're tired.
Okay.
An anxious mind might immediately jump to, they're avoiding me.
Right.
Instead of the much more likely explanation, which is that they actually just had a long day
Right.
and need some rest.
It's a classic.
Yeah.
That's a perfect illustration.
Mhm.
It's like your brain is scanning for threats, even when there are none.
Right.
And unfortunately, this tendency to overanalyze can actually create the very problems you're afraid of.
That's scary.
It is.
Because if you're constantly accusing your partner of things they didn't do
Yeah.
or questioning their every move,
Right.
it's bound to create tension and conflict in the relationship.
Right. And it can become a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Ugh.
You're so convinced that something is wrong that you end up creating the very problem you were worried about in the first place.
So, apart from past relationship trauma,
Mm-hmm.
attachment styles, low self-esteem,
Yeah.
and this tendency to overanalyze,
Right.
what are some other things that can contribute to relationship anxiety?
Well, our sources also talk about unresolved personal issues.
Okay.
Like maybe you're dealing with some unresolved trauma,
Right.
or you have some deeply ingrained negative thought patterns that you haven't fully addressed.
Yeah.
These things can definitely spill over into your relationships
Oh,
and create a sense of unease or anxiety.
it makes sense. It's like if you're carrying around a lot of emotional baggage,
Yeah.
it's going to weigh you down in all areas of your life,
Right, yeah.
including your relationships.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there are external factors that can play a role, too.
Oh, sure.
Things like work stress,
Right.
financial difficulties, health issues,
Yeah.
family dramas.
Yeah.
All of these things can create a ripple effect that impacts our relationships.
Oh, absolutely. I think we can all relate to that feeling of being so overwhelmed by everything else going on in our lives
Right.
that it becomes hard to be fully present and engaged in our relationships.
Right. And it's not that these external factors are causing the relationship anxiety directly.
Okay.
It's more that they create this underlying sense of stress and tension
Right.
that can make it harder to cope with those normal relationship ups and downs.
So it's like when you're already feeling stretched thin,
Yeah.
you're more vulnerable to those anxious thoughts and feelings.
Exactly. And all of this can manifest in some pretty telltale signs that we'll discuss in part 2 of our deep dive.
Okay.
But before we move on to those,
All right.
I want to emphasize that experiencing some anxiety in relationships is completely normal.
Sure.
It's when these anxieties start to dominate your thoughts,
Right.
affect your behavior,
Yeah.
and interfere with your ability to enjoy the relationship,
Right.
that it might be time to explore those underlying causes and start developing some coping strategies.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
So stay tuned for part 2, where we'll dive deeper into the specific signs of relationship anxiety and explore some practical tips for managing those anxieties and building healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
I'm excited for that.
Me too.
Oh.
Okay, so we've talked about some of the root causes of relationship anxiety, but now I'm curious about the signs.
Yeah.
How can you actually tell if you're dealing with this or if it's just, normal relationship stuff?
That's a great question, and it's something our sources dive into pretty deeply. One of those common signs is constantly doubting your partner's feelings. It's like no matter how much they reassure you, you still find yourself questioning their love or wondering if they're truly invested.
Oh, I know that feeling. It's like you need constant validation, like hearing, I love you a million times a day just to feel secure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the Very Well Mind article actually mentions this, looking for constant reassurance as a hallmark of relationship anxiety. But here's the thing, it's often driven by that deep-seated fear of not being good enough, not being worthy of love. It's not really about your partner's actions, it's about your own internal struggles.
That makes a lot of sense. So how do you break out of that cycle?
Well, that's where some of the coping strategies we'll talk about later come in. But before we get to those, let's explore a few more signs. Another big one is overanalyzing, which we touched on earlier. It's that constant need to dissect every interaction, every text message, every facial expression. Like you're trying to decode some secret message that doesn't even exist.
The Calm blog put it perfectly, saying it's like deciphering hidden meanings in every word and action.
Right. And, sometimes a raised eyebrow is just a raised eyebrow, not a sign that your partner is secretly plotting their escape.
Yeah.
It's about learning to recognize those anxious thought patterns and challenging them.
I think a relatable example from Healthline was worrying because your partner doesn't like holding hands.
That's such a good one. There could be a million reasons why someone might not be a handholder. Maybe they get sweaty palms. Maybe they just find it uncomfortable. But an anxious mind might immediately jump to conclusions about their level of affection.
Okay, so doubting your partner's feelings and overanalyzing their actions are two big red flags. What else should we be on the lookout for?
Fear of abandonment is another major sign. It's that constant fear that your partner is going to leave, even if there's no logical reason to believe that.
It's like that feeling of waiting for the other shoe to drop even when there's no sign of a storm.
Exactly.
Mm.
And this fear can be so paralyzing. It can prevent you from fully opening up to your partner or enjoying the relationship in the present moment because you're so worried about the future.
And this fear can actually lead to some pretty self-sabotaging behaviors, right?
Absolutely.
Mm.
Like the Healthline article mentions, you might start picking fights, pushing your partner away, or creating drama as a way of testing their commitment. It's a twisted logic, but it's like you're trying to prove that they love you enough to stick around even when you're being difficult.
But doesn't that usually backfire?
It often does. Because who wants to be in a relationship where they constantly feel tested or like they're walking on eggshells? It creates unnecessary tension and can actually push your partner away, which is the opposite of what you want.
It's a vicious cycle for sure. And I guess another sign that things might be out of balance is when the worry outweighs the enjoyment in the relationship.
That's a crucial point that Healthline brings up. They ask the question, am I spending more time worrying about this relationship than enjoying it? And I think that's something we all need to ask ourselves from time to time, because relationships are meant to enrich our lives, not drain us.
Right. If it's causing you more stress than happiness, it's definitely a sign that something needs to shift.
Right.
So we've talked about the signs, and it's pretty clear that a lot of this stems from our own internal stuff. But what can we actually do about it? Where do we even begin to tackle relationship anxiety?
Well, the good news is that there are a lot of effective coping strategies out there, and our sources offer some really practical advice. One of the most important things, which comes up again and again, is open communication. The Calm blog really emphasizes creating a safe space where feelings are acknowledged, not judged.
So instead of bottling things up or trying to play it cool, just be honest with your partner about what you're feeling.
Exactly. And it's not about dumping all your anxieties on them or expecting them to fix everything. It's more about expressing your needs and concerns in a healthy way so you can work through them together.
That makes a lot of sense. And it's probably especially important in those early stages of dating when you're still figuring each other out.
Absolutely. Those early conversations can really set the tone for the relationship. It's about building trust and intimacy right from the start.
Okay, so open communication is key. What else can help?
Well, another strategy that's been incredibly helpful for me and that Calm really emphasizes is mindfulness.
Okay, mindfulness. I've heard that word a lot, but I'm not always sure what it actually means in a practical sense.
Think of it as being fully present in the moment without judgment. It's about noticing those anxious thoughts and feelings as they arise, but not getting swept away by them. It's like acknowledging that those thoughts are there, but choosing not to engage with them.
I can see how that would be helpful. But isn't it hard to be present when you're spiraling with anxiety?
It definitely takes practice. But the more you do it, the better you become at recognizing those anxious thought patterns and choosing not to let them control you. It's like building a muscle. The more you work it, the stronger it gets.
I like that analogy. So what are some practical ways to incorporate mindfulness into daily life?
Well, Calm suggests resources like the Daily Calm and working with thoughts, but even simple things like deep breathing exercises, meditation, or mindful movement can make a huge difference. It's about finding what works for you and making it a regular practice.
That makes sense. It's not about becoming some kind of Zen master overnight. It's about finding small, sustainable ways to bring more awareness and presence into your life.
Exactly. And another technique that can be really powerful is identifying your triggers.
Oh yeah, this is something the Calm blog talks about in their Overcome Stress and Anxiety course. It's about paying attention to what sets off those anxious feelings.
Right. Is it certain topics of conversation, specific situations? Maybe it's when your partner doesn't text you back right away or when they make plans without you. Once you know your triggers, you can start to develop strategies for managing them.
Like, if you know that talking about the future tends to send you into an anxiety spiral, maybe you and your partner agree to set some boundaries around those conversations, at least until you feel more secure in the relationship.
That's a great example. It's about being proactive and taking control of your anxiety rather than letting it control you. And this brings me to another piece of advice that I found particularly insightful.
Okay, all my layers.
It's about maintaining your individuality, which both Calm and Healthline touch upon. They talk about cultivating hobbies and passions outside of the relationship, nurturing your friendships, and basically remembering that you have a whole person with your own interests and goals.
So it's not about becoming completely enmeshed with your partner.
Exactly. It's about maintaining a healthy sense of self. And this can actually strengthen the relationship because it allows both partners to bring their best selves to the table.
I love that. It's about complementing each other, not completing each other.
Beautifully put. And this ties back to those attachment styles we talked about earlier. If you have a tendency towards anxious attachment, It can be easy to become overly dependent on your partner for your sense of security and validation.
So having your own life outside the relationship can actually help to create a more secure foundation.
Exactly. And it prevents that codependency that can sometimes suffocate a relationship. And finally, all three of our sources emphasize the importance of seeking professional help when needed.
Yes. Therapy, especially couples therapy, can be so beneficial in addressing relationship anxiety.
Absolutely. A therapist can provide a safe and supportive space to explore those deeper issues, develop coping mechanisms, and learn healthier communication skills.
And it doesn't have to be a long-term commitment either.
Right. The Healthline article mentions that research suggests even a single session can be beneficial. Sometimes just having that outside perspective and getting some guidance can make a world of difference.
That's really encouraging to hear. Now, what if you're on the other side of this? What if it's your partner who's struggling with relationship anxiety?
That's a great question. And thankfully, the Calm blog offers some excellent advice for supporting an anxious partner.
I bet a lot of people listening are eager to hear this. It can be so tough to know how to help someone who's struggling with anxiety, especially in the context of a romantic relationship.
It definitely requires patience and understanding.
Yeah.
And their first tip is all about building trust, being consistent, reliable, and transparent. Basically, showing up for your partner in a dependable and authentic way.
Actions speak louder than words, right?
Absolutely. And their next tip is to create a safe space for your partner to express their anxiety without judgment.
So being a good listener, validating their feelings, and not trying to fix them.
Exactly. It's about offering empathy and understanding, not unsolicited advice or solutions. And finally, they emphasize that navigating anxiety is a shared responsibility. It's not about one person fixing the other. It's about approaching it as a team.
Working together to find solutions and supporting each other through those tough moments. I love that.
Me too. And it brings us to a really crucial point. Relationship anxiety really boils down to, I think, wanting that connection,
Right.
but also fearing vulnerability.
Yeah, it's like this
Yeah.
tension between the two.
It's like this primal dance between our need for love
Right.
and our fear of getting hurt.
Yeah.
And that fear can really sabotage our efforts to create healthy, secure relationships.
It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah.
We're so afraid of getting hurt
Right.
that we end up creating the very scenarios we're trying to avoid.
It's the ultimate irony, isn't it?
Yeah.
And it makes you realize that a lot of the work we need to do in relationships is actually internal work.
Right.
It's about understanding our own patterns, healing those old wounds,
Right.
and building a stronger sense of self.
Which brings us back to that idea of maintaining individuality.
Yeah.
It's not just about having hobbies
Right.
or separate friend groups. It's about cultivating a deep sense of self-worth that doesn't depend on external validation from our partners.
Exactly. Because when you're secure in yourself,
Right.
you're less likely to seek that constant reassurance
Oh.
or overanalyze every little thing your partner does.
Right.
You're able to show up in the relationship from a place of wholeness,
Right.
not neediness.
And that's so much more empowering.
It is.
It's like you're saying, I choose you not because I need you,
Yes.
but because I want you.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
And it shifts the whole dynamic of the relationship.
Right.
Instead of it being about filling some void or fixing some broken part of yourself,
Right.
it becomes about sharing your life with someone who celebrates your individuality
Yeah.
and supports your growth.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yes.
I want to circle back to those practical tips we discussed earlier.
Go.
What are some small steps that listeners can take today to start managing their relationship anxiety and building healthier connections?
Well, if communication is a struggle, maybe it's about initiating a conversation with your partner.
Yeah.
Not a blame fest,
Right.
but an honest, heartfelt conversation about your anxieties and how you can support each other.
And if mindfulness seems intimidating,
Right.
maybe it's just committing to 5 minutes of deep breathing each day.
Yeah.
Or downloading one of those meditation apps that Calm recommends.
Or maybe it's reaching out to a therapist for a single session, just to get some guidance and perspective.
The point is, even the smallest step can create a ripple effect.
Absolutely.
It's about showing up for yourself and for your relationship with intention and with care.
And remember, you don't have to do this alone.
Right.
There are resources available, communities of support,
Yeah.
and professionals who can help you navigate these challenges.
So as we close out this episode,
Okay.
I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question. Knowing what you now know about relationship anxiety, what small act of self-care or connection will you choose today?
Perhaps it's a gentle conversation with yourself, acknowledging those anxious thoughts without judgment.
Or maybe it's reaching out to a friend for support.
Yeah,
Or simply taking some time for yourself to do something that brings you joy.
whatever it is, remember that you're not alone on this journey
Right.
and that taking even the smallest step can make a world of difference in creating the fulfilling, loving relationships you deserve.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep exploring the fascinating world of human connection.